Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here, and today we're talking distortion pedals. The good, the bad, the real bad, and how to get the most out of yours. As many of you probably know, we tend to talk about digital emulation of tube amplifiers because that's the sound we think of when we think of guitar tone a vast majority of the time. But most people can't justify either recording with one of these because of cost or space, or especially if you're in that touring situation, weight, which again transfers into cost and time. So we end up going with plugins for the recording world or hardware that more or less sounds the same, especially by the time you get it mixed down or it's blasting over PA speakers. But some of us simply cannot justify the cost of those solutions, or simply don't have the space or the time to dedicate to learning an amp modeler. Or maybe you do, and you simply like the sound of a distortion pedal. You know, there are plenty of tones, whether we're talking the legendary HM2, or if you consider fuzz distortion, that simply cannot be replicated with just an all-tube amplifier or even a transistor amp for that matter. So in this video, we're going to be going over a few simple ways that you can doctor up your distortion pedal sound, whether you're plugging straight into your PC sound card or practicing in front of a 1x8 combo amp, or maybe you're playing out and the last band has given you the luxury of plugging into the effects return of a half stack, which would be the best case scenario here. I'm going to show you a few ways that you can tweak the otherwise limited settings on pedals like these. So today's guinea pigs kind of represent a few corners of the distortion pedal world. Distortion pedals as a name is so vague that they kind of apply to anything that throws dirt in front of an amplifier. But the way I'm treating it is if you were to take one of these and plug them in front of a clean channel of an amplifier, this does everything for you. It filters the guitar. It, lets it sit in the mix, so to speak, in the way that you want it to. It basically replaces everything you would need to achieve a high gain guitar tone, except for the power speakers. So the first pedal I have is a Mosky Black Rat. This is, for all intents and purposes, a clone of the legendary Proco Rat. I have it set in the vintage mode for this entire video, so it's not like the turbo version. This is more akin to a traditional all analog, gain, volume, filter, or tone control, as it were here, where honestly, this sounds as much like a fuzz pedal as most fuzz pedals do. So this is kind of going to be our worst case scenario. And if we can get this to sound halfway decent, you should be golden. Second on our list is the Digitech Metal Master, which was my first full-blown distortion pedal ever. The limitations this imposes is that, well, it doesn't even have a gain control, so you better be happy with the distortion on this thing because you can't really do much else. Level, high and low, and a glorified contour control they've named Morph, which supposedly emulates the overall frequency response of Mesa Boogie amps all the way up to something like the death metal. Its success rate is not exactly great with that feature, but hey, we can pretend for the sake of this video. And finally, the Behringer UM300, which is essentially their Boss Metal Zone clone and features all the original controls, even if they are split between a couple knobs here. So this, in terms of control, will be our best case scenario. But as you'll see, there's still certainly a couple things that we can tweak to get some better sounds out of it. For every clip you hear in this video, I'll be playing through my Cherrytone Gargoyles effects return using nothing but the depth and presence circuits. That means the preamp is bypassed completely. And then that will be plugged into a 4x12 cabinet loaded with vintage 30s because metal, of course. And I think this represents sort of a middle ground to what you might expect to play through. You know, if you plug into a solid state amplifier, even in the preamp section, you're going to have more EQ control than I do here. So it should sound better, or you should have to do less tweaking than I will in this video to get kind of a produced guitar tone. However, this will sort of help us out in the sense that you're getting that resonance effect from the impedance off the speakers, and the tube power amp just kind of helps it sit in the mix more naturally, not to mention depth and presence, so you get some hi-fi controls there. Or say you wanted to record direct with one of these distortion pedals, you just plug it straight into your computer, load up an impulse response, maybe even a tube power amp emulation, and you'll essentially get the same recorded sound that I'm getting here. So let's start with a simple way to transform the sound of one of your distortion pedals, which is to throw another dirt pedal out in front. This is something that many of you probably already have, some sort of Tube Screamer clone, and this isn't something I would recommend for a lot of quote-unquote distortion pedals because they're already doing a lot of what this is doing in the box, adding some amount of compression, some amount of pre-distortion boost, and there's probably a lot of filtering going on. But with a pedal like this, which really isn't doing what it's designed to be doing in this video, this helps it to sound more amp-like, kind of brings out some of those more mid-focus frequencies that we expect to hear in a guitar. And so we'll be setting this in kind of a manner that most of you already know when it comes to high gain guitar tones. Maybe a touch of the gain / overdrive control, crank the level and tone to taste. And this goes from sounding extremely flubby to, well, more like an amplifier. This cascading distortion method also helps combat the gating effect you can get on the rat pedal. Not that this is something that's extremely common nowadays, but if you do have a circuit that reacts sort of like this, where it kind of just, sounds like you're hitting a brick wall every time you hit a hard chug, then this can make it sound a little bit more manageable and more open. Now let's solve a more simple issue. This pedal doesn't have a gain control, which might not be an issue for you, but what if you have a lower output pickup system that's just not hitting this hard enough and you don't get as much distortion as you want? Perhaps you have the opposite problem where your active pickup equipped guitar is just slamming this thing and it sounds horrendous. You're getting feedback and you don't want to mess with the volume control. Well, enter the graphic equalizer, or any clean boost for that matter, with a level control. This becomes our gain. Now, why use this instead of like the Tube Screamer in the previous example? A couple of reasons. First of all, I like the distortion character well enough on this pedal that I don't want to introduce any more compression or additional dirt that would muddy up the signal. And that's what those kind of pedals are going to do, especially if they're not modified. They're always going to have just a little touch of that. Not to mention that the tone control, whether it be set at dead noon, min, or max, is always filtering the signal, and this pedal already kind of does that for you. So instead of going with this EQ curve that you've probably seen me do a lot, where we roll off the low end, maybe accentuate some of the mids, I'll do that on, say, some of the amps behind me. What I'll do this time is just slightly alter the frequency response going into this pedal, maybe cutting a couple boomy frequencies, attenuating some of the ones that maybe sound honky, like there's a cocked wah going on, because that can certainly happen with pedals of this nature. And maybe there's too much high-end roll-off, so I'll boost those a bit. And then we'll use the level control as our overall output gain, and you get something that May not be super transformative in this instance. It definitely can be. I went pretty subtle with this effect because it didn't need much. But for your playing, and especially if you have a more sensitive pedal, this can be the ticket from turning it into something that kind of sits well in the mix, but it just doesn't have the pick attack or the sustain or whatever you're looking for. This can be it if you don't lose the output level slider. Where the hell did that go? Our third pedal looks pretty good, at least on paper, assuming you don't know about the Metal Zone memes. We've got a dedicated distortion control, 3-band EQ, we can even choose the middle frequency, we've got output level, but there's only a few settings on this pedal that really sound convincing to me. You know, don't do the max treble, max bass thing, it's just horrible. Something along this line can be a decent boost in front of an amplifier if you're going for the Cannibal Corpse sound, or even in front of a capable clean channel, it can work. But let's say worst case scenario, you're plugging through an effects return like I am, or you're doing something else that involves a more direct rig. This can sound sort of lo-fi and just fake would be the simplest term I'd attach to it. That's where post EQ can come in handy. This is, again, sort of a worst case scenario because this is a fairly noisy pedal and I wouldn't recommend you put this in front of here unless absolutely necessary. But you'll see the curve I've dialed in here kind of replicates the overall frequency response you might find on a tube amp's tone stack, especially in like the Fender category. Here specifically, I'm scooping out a lot of the content around 500 hertz. That tends to be like that honky mid-focused pedal sound because this is assuming a lot of the times that you're plugging in front of something that's going to do this. So, you know, we kind of have to do it for it. And then I'm also highlighting a little bit of the lows around 125 and even above 2K. And this kind of mimics that impedance curve you'd see with a tube power section interacting with a speaker cabinet. Although we're already sort of getting that effect here, I didn't feel it was pronounced enough, and you know, we're not using the preamp. So in this case, I'm going to dial in something that looks sort of like this. You do need to be careful because I find, especially on pedals that use transistor technology, they don't attenuate the high end the same way that tubes would. So especially in that 8 to 16K region, you can get a lot of shrill nastiness that may need to be attenuated. But in general, you do something that looks sort of like this, and we'll go over more examples at the end of the video, then you can transform this into something that, oh, actually sits in the mix the way an amp would. These techniques aren't half bad on their own, but what if we implement them all at the same time? That's where the magic really shines. Now, would I expect any of you to buy a $30, $40 used distortion pedal and then spend another 80 to 200 bucks on EQs to fix it? No. You can go out there and find more affordable, well, clones of circuits like this, or especially Tube Screamers, that will achieve the same sort of effect and will align more effectively with the gear you're already using. And like I said, there's a good chance you already have stuff lying around that can sort of do this. If you're recording straight to an interface, you can certainly use plugins. At that point, I would probably recommend you just use VST amplifiers to begin with. But again, if you have a certain tone you're going after, this can be a way to really make it shine. And, you know, there's a couple sounds in here that they don't sound like real amplifiers. And I think that's kind of the whole point. So without further ado, 2 rounds of EQ or boosting with each of these pedals. I hope these tricks help you out on your distortion pedal journey. For those of you that have been subscribed for the past couple of months, you might have caught my ultimate dirt shootout finale for season 2. So before we moved on to more amp-related content, I wanted to kind of have a last hurrah with dirt pedals in general, that being more of the overdrive side of things and this being more full-blown distortion pedals. So hopefully that was fun, at least halfway entertaining. It's not something that I'll probably use too often, but when I do use distortion pedals, that's pretty much how. So again, if you found enjoyment or value out of this, please let me know down below. Questions and comments, as always, down there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.